So genetic means something related to the gene. So the variation in the genetic composition among species of a particular population is called as genetic diversity. The type of species living on a terrestrial ecosystem is completely different when compared to that of the aquatic ecosystem. That is, the Himalayan zone is said to be the provider for all the rivers that are flowing in a country. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to today's session on Environmental Studies for second semester BCom. I'm Dr. Divya, Environmental Studies faculty, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So in today's session, let us learn about Unit 4, that is Biodiversity and Conservation. So in today's session under Unit 4, let's learn about what is biodiversity and what are the different types of biodiversities that are there, wherein three categories it is divided into, and what are the different geographical zones that are present in India. So all that we shall cover in today's session. So talking about biodiversity, what is this biodiversity? So bio means life. The meaning of bio is life, and diversity means variety or different organisms present in a particular area. So putting together the two words, that is bio and diversity, biodiversity is nothing but different kinds of life that you will find in one particular area. So bio means life, diversity means different kinds. So therefore, biodiversity is the different forms of life or different kinds of life that you found in a particular area. So moving further, there are three levels of biodiversity. So the three levels of biodiversity are genetic diversity, then we have species diversity and ecosystem diversity. So based on these three levels, every time the biological diversity or the biodiversity is studied. So what are these three levels? We shall study in detail. So talking about genetic diversity. So what is genetic diversity? So the variation in the genetic composition. Again here, diversity means variation. So genetic means something related to the gene. So the variation in the genetic composition among species of a particular population is called as genetic diversity. So genes are the ones that control the characters of all the living organisms, right? Say for example, we human beings, we are different from one another by the way we look, our skin color and everything, right? We do not look exactly like another person. At least a minute variation will be there. Why that variation or why that difference? It is because of the genes that are controlling the various characteristics in a body. So therefore, and this genetic diversity is the one that is actually bringing about a variety of organisms in this particular planet or the world. So that is about genetic diversity, which is the variation in the genetic composition among the species in a particular area or a particular population. So let's know the importance of genetic diversity. Why genetic diversity is needed under biodiversity? So the amount of diversity or variation that is found at the genetic level is important because it represents the raw material for evolution and adaptation. That is true, right? Because more number of variations in the genes, more number of chances of a particular organism evolving and adapting to that particular environment. Say for example, again here, we human beings, did we come to earth as such? No, we came to earth or we were introduced into the earth in the form of the monkeys, right? The monkeys or the primates, that is the ape family, they actually evolved over a period of time and they got formed into the human beings that we are there present. And even today also, we human beings are evolving. Earlier, human beings had a very larger brain. But today, the brain size has shrinked. So that is how every now and then, for thousands of years, the evolution process is taking place wherein the change in a particular organism is occurring. So this change is very, very important. Why this change is important? Because we need to adapt to the particular habitat. It's just like using your technology, right? Earlier, there was no mobile phones, and when the mobile phones were introduced, it was just with a small screen and with lots of buttons. But today you have the widescreen mobile phones with just the touch facilities and all that, right? How much it has evolved. And haven't you adapted yourself to use the use of such mobiles? Haven't you adapted yourselves to the technology? Just like that, because of different genetic variations occurring in particular population, it is very important because these genes help in a particular organism to evolve. Say for example, I can take the example of snakes. It was said that earlier snakes had limbs. Snakes belong to the reptile family, and they were said to have evolved from the crocodiles and all that. Why? Because they had limbs. But eventually what happened, to escape from the predators, these snakes started to run fast. So that is when they started to, during the course of evolution, that is since many years, because they started to run very fast, there was no need for them to have, that is, legs. So that is why they lost their legs, and now the snakes, they just crawl very fast in the ground so that it is easy for them to escape from the predators. Likewise, in our human body also, earlier monkeys had tail, but do we have tail now? Of course, tail is there, but it is hidden inside the body in the form of a tailbone or a coccyx bone. So that is how. Just like that, we have an organ called as appendix, right? So that particular appendix organ, though it is not at all useful in a body, but it is still there in a body. But it has no function. Whether it is there in a body, whether it is removed a body, it will never affect our daily activities, because during the course of evolution, appendix has lost its function because of the changes in the food habit that we are eating. Earlier, appendix was needed because raw materials were consumed by those people there before evolution. But as the process of evolution started, now we don't prefer eating raw meat or any raw kind of food, right? We prefer eating the cooked one. So therefore, there is no use for the appendix there. So that is how, in order to adapt to that particular situation or to particular changes in the environmental condition, evolution is very, very important. And that evolution is brought about only if there are variation in the genes or the genetic diversity in a particular area or a population. So more genetic diversity in species or population means a greater ability for some of the individuals in it to adapt to changes in the environment. And less diversity means it will lead to uniformity. Say for example, you are growing a particular crop in a field. In that field, there will be crops which are very healthy. There will be crops which are not that healthy. Crops which are resistant to environmental stresses. Crops which are not resistant to environmental stresses. So 100% of the crops, if you grow, which are not resistant to environmental stresses, later when any environmental calamity occurs, you will be in a loss, right? Because you would have lost your crop completely because of heavy rain, flooding, drought or whatever. But on the other hand, if you grow the crops, like if you grow a mixture of crops, what happens there? You'll have crops which are capable of resisting the environmental situations. There are crops which are not able to resist the environmental situation, but still whenever there is an environmental calamity, at least some of the crops will get protected in the field, right? So that is why genetic variations in a population is very, very important here. Why? Because less diversity, genetic diversity will lead to uniformity in the particular population, which is a problem in the long term, as it is unlikely that any individual in a population would be able to adapt to changing conditions. So, if a particular population has to adapt to the changes in a particular environmental condition or to the particular habitat in which they are living, lots of genetic diversity is needed. So that is why genetic diversity is very, very important. So next, talking about the species diversity. So here genetic diversity means it is related to the genes. When we talk about species diversity is defined as the number of species and the abundance of each of these species that live in a particular location. Say for example, genetic diversity means we have mango, different varieties of mango, right? So mango, Mangifera indica, for example, it is a species here. If I take the example, Mangifera indica, that is mango. It is a scientific name of mango. So mango is a species, but when we talk about the genetic variety, there are different varieties of mangoes under Mangifera indica, right? So therefore species is Mangifera indica, means Mangifera indica is a species. Cocos nucifera, for example, coconut is a species. Then we have Panthera leo, that is lion, is a species. So this is about species. Genetic diversity will bring about variation in a species. But the difference in species diversity is with one population of organism belongs to one particular species. For example, Panthera leo. They're all the lion family, right? So they are one set of species. Next we have again to the lion family itself, the cat also belongs. But can we call the cat a lion? Not possible. The cat is put under different species. So that is how it comes under the phylic. So like that, the different species have been classified. So species diversity is defined as the number of species and abundance of each species that live in a particular location. So talking about the importance of species diversity. So species diversity is very, very important when compared to the other two levels of diversity, that is the genetic diversity and the ecological diversity. How? We shall look into. Why? Because species diversity is easier to work with. Rather than working with the genes and the ecosystem as a whole, talking about the species is very, very important. Why? Because you look at a coconut tree, you can say it is a coconut tree species. You look at a mango tree, you can say it is a mango tree species. You look at a frog, you say it is a frog species, right? So easy identification and therefore easy working. But when you have to study for genetic diversity, you'll have to look into each and every minute characters there. So that is why it is easier to work with species diversity when compared to that of the genetic diversity or the ecological diversity. So one of the important features of species diversity is species diversity is easier to work with when compared to the other two levels of diversity. And species are relatively easy to identify in the field by eyes. As I told you, when you look at something, you can say this is a lion. Of course, we have Panthera leo, we have Panthera tigris, various species, but both are Panthera. They belong to Panthera. But when you look at a lion, you can say it is a lion. When you look at a tiger, you can say it is a tiger. When you look at a leopard, you'll say it is a leopard, and so on. You'll say, when you look at a cat, you can say it is a cat. You can differentiate, right? By just looking at it, you can differentiate it. Whereas genetic diversity cannot be differentiated by looking at it. You always need to depend on the laboratory equipments or laboratory related studies for this. So therefore, species are relatively easy to observe and study when compared to the genetic diversity. And also genetic diversity will require a lot of time and a lot of resources, and also this ecosystem diversity is also difficult because it requires a lot of complex measurements which has to be taken over a long period of time. Why? Because ecosystem diversity means you will be studying the diversity of the ecosystem. So that can be an ocean ecosystem, it can be an aquatic ecosystem, a terrestrial ecosystem, aerial ecosystem, whatnot, right? So when you're taking, say for example, you're taking an aquatic ecosystem, it is very vast. Say for example, the coral reef that comes under the aquatic ecosystem. Corals themselves harbors millions of different species, which few of the names which we even don't know about. So that is why learning about ecosystem diversity and genetic diversity is quite difficult when compared to species diversity, because species diversity, by just looking at the organism itself, you can differentiate between them, which is not possible. This is very vast in genetic diversity and in the ecosystem diversity. And species are easier to conceptualize, and they have been the basis of much of the evolutionary and ecological research that biodiversity draws on. So easy to conceptualize, because once you look at a species, it will get registered in your mind. Therefore, it is easy for you to say which particular species that particular plant is of or that animal is of. It is easy, right? So that is one of the reason. And one more reason is species diversity is easy to study evolutionary related studies on species diversity. Why? Because say for example, I'll say Mangifera indica, that is it belongs to mango, right? So I know the species is Mangifera indica. Now some slight variation in the mango plant, I can easily look into the characters with my eyes and I can say there are some variations. There are some variations occurring in the mango plant or lot of variations occurring in the mango plant because of evolution. So therefore, I cannot put them under one particular species, but I need to remove it and put it under a separate species, right? We are Homo sapiens. Again, do we belong to the monkey species now? No, but we are given a different species name called as Homo sapiens because our characters, a lot of changes has occurred in the human beings' characters when compared to the monkeys or the apes of the earlier times because of evolution. So therefore, studying evolution, taking species diversity is very, very easy. So that these are the importance of species diversity in a biodiversity. Next, talking about ecosystem diversity. So ecosystem diversity means we have the aquatic ecosystem, the terrestrial ecosystem and the aerial ecosystem, that is the air. So here it is very, very vast, right? So ecosystem diversity can be defined as the variety of different habitats, communities and ecological processes. Again, in terrestrial ecosystem we have the mountain ecosystem, we have the desert ecosystem. So what not, it is further divided. So ecosystem can be defined as the variety of different habitats, communities and ecological process. So let's talk about the importance of ecosystem diversity. So each ecosystem provides much different kind of habitat or living places, therefore providing a home for a myriad of species or a variety of species. The type of species living on a terrestrial ecosystem is completely different when compared to that of the aquatic ecosystem. And the type of species that are living both in the aquatic as well as in the terrestrial ecosystem, they are completely different from the species that are there in the aquatic ecosystem and in the terrestrial ecosystem. And likewise, the aerial ecosystem. So those organisms living in the aerial ecosystem, they are completely different from the terrestrial and the aquatic ecosystem, right? So that is why these changes? These changes are again because those species will have to adapt to the particular habitat in which they are living in that particular ecosystem. Right. So here say for example, fish. Can I take a fish and put it on the land? Of course, it might survive for a few minutes, but later on it will die. Why? Because fishes, they do not have limbs like us to walk back and fall back into the water. And also these fishes, they don't have lungs like us wherein they can make use, or lungs like the animals and the other that is birds and all that, because they cannot make use of the atmospheric oxygen. They only have gills which they can breathe using the dissolved oxygen that is there in the water. So likewise, so fishes are meant to live only in the water. You cannot put them to a terrestrial ecosystem. So that is why here a particular habitat is meant for a particular species itself. So that is why studying ecological ecosystem is quite, or ecological diversity is quite vast, because you have to study in each of the ecosystem. Again, talking about the terrestrial ecosystem, if I have to say. So terrestrial ecosystem here, in that we have the deserts, we have the snow, right? So those organisms living in the alpine regions or the snow falling regions, they have a particular kind of adaptations, a particular kind of body features when compared to those living in the desert or the semi-arid regions. Why this variation? Again, this variation is because of the genes itself, so that the organisms can evolve and adapt to that particular environmental condition. And these variations in the genes, what it brings about? It brings about a diversity in the species. So therefore, all these levels of biodiversity are interconnected to one another here. So different species have different functional roles to play in an ecosystem, which helps them to maintain the characteristics unique to that ecosystem. As I told you, aquatic ecosystem means they'll have their own characteristics to live in that aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial ecosystem means they'll have their own characteristics to live in that and adapt to that particular terrestrial ecosystem. This is why ecosystem diversity is very, very important, because if there is no diverse organism, there is no differentiation between the terrestrial, aquatic and the aerial ecosystem. Why? Because this ecosystem diversity is very, very important if an organism needs to survive in that particular habitat in whichever it is living. So, this is about ecosystem diversity. So next, let's talk about the biogeography zones in India. So India is divided into somewhere around 10 biogeography zones. Each of these we'll study one by one. So what is biogeography zones? So biogeographic zones or biogeographic regions are geographical areas that are defined based on the species found in them. So species of flora and fauna. So flora means here plants, flora is plants, and fauna means animals. So different types of flora and fauna, what is there in that particular area will determine the biogeographic zone. Say for example, we have the Trans-Himalayan region. The type of organisms found in the Trans-Himalayan region or the type of life that is found in the Trans-Himalayan region is completely different when compared to that of the coastal zones, right? So how is these zones differentiated? Zones is differentiated based on the type of organisms, be it the plant or the animals that is living in that particular habitat. So let's study about each of these zones one by one. So I told you it is divided into the 10 zones. So India has 10 biogeographical zones. The first one being the Trans-Himalayas. So the Trans-Himalaya zone. So this one, it is the Trans-Himalayan zone. Trans-Himalaya. Then we have the Himalaya zone. Himalaya zone. Then comes the semi-arid zone. So this is the semi-arid zone. Then we have the Gangetic plains. Gangetic plains. Then comes the desert zone. So this is the desert zone, or I'll write it here. It's the desert zone. Then comes the northeast zone. So northeast zone is here. Northeast zone. Then comes the Deccan Peninsula zone or the Deccan Plateau zone. So this is the Deccan Plateau zone or Deccan Peninsula zone. Then comes the coastal zone. So coastal zone is here. The black one, wherever there is black, it is the coastal zone. Then we have the Western Ghats. So Western Ghats, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, all these regions have, and some parts of Maharashtra also has the Western Ghat zone. Western Ghat zone. Then comes the island. So island, we have the Lakshadweep Island and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So some of the island zone that are distributed here and some of the island zones towards this side. So we have the island zone. So these are the 10 zones that are given. So here if you can see, here the animals that they have shown are completely different. Say for example, so if you see the Trans-Himalayan region, we find the goat species which are covered by very thick fur and long hairs, right? So it is different, and the plant species there is also different. Now talking about the Himalaya zone, we have some of the bird species there. Talking about the desert, we have the camel and all that, wherein camel and all that you don't find it anywhere else other than the desert, right? So we have in the semi-arid zone, we have that is where grasslands and all are there. We have the tiger, lion, and Gangetic plains, because it is filled with water, that is marshy areas. Gangetic plains are always marshy wetlands. So therefore their crocodiles and all that are found more. So likewise, based on different regions, the habitat tends to vary. So a particular organism is found in abundance in that particular habitat. I'm not saying that they're not, like crocodile are found elsewhere also, but majority of the species are found in the Gangetic plains because it is always marshy. So likewise here, biogeography zone means based on the species of organisms living in that particular area, various zones are divided in a particular country. So therefore India has 10 biogeography zones. So we'll study about each of these one by one. So talking about the Trans-Himalayan zone. So it is present in the northernmost region of India, and it extends from the Tibetan plateau and continues to the Himalayas. And here it actually vegetation is very less here. That is, plant species is very less or minimal, and most of the time it consists of bare rock and glaciers, that is ice. And vegetation in this region is scanty, that is, it is very less. Vegetation is very less because of the extreme climates. It is not possible for the plants to survive there. Therefore, it is very less because they have the extreme climates, that is extreme long winters and very short summers, because summers are needed for the plants to live, because for photosynthesis, sunlight is the one that is very important, right? So that is why. But it has a large population of wild sheep and goat that are there. So this region is also home for snow leopard, black and brown bears, then wolves, marmots, marbled cat, then they have the ibex, the kiang, and also some of the migratory black-necked cranes are also present in this region. But majority, large population, they are home for wild sheep and the goat. And vegetation is very scanty or very less in this particular zone. So this is about the Trans-Himalayan zone. Next, moving to the Himalayan zone. So it is a part of the Himalayas. This zone is a part of the Himalayas, and it lies completely within India, and it forms a junction between the Trans-Himalayan zone and the northeast zone of India. And this zone, that is the Himalayan zone, is said to be the provider for all the rivers that are flowing in a country, because there the ice melts and it will enter into, they will form the streams and the rivers. Therefore they will flow from the northern region to the southern parts of a country. So most of the rivers are fed by the Himalayan zone. So it is a major provider of fresh water to a larger part of India. And this region is rich in flora, that is, it has a lot of plants. Whereas what did we learn? The Trans-Himalayan zone had very less plant species, but this zone is rich in plant species, and it covers the alpine, subalpine and moist deciduous forest are there, and it also has some of the animals such as the burrell, the ibex, the Himalayan thar, then takin, markhor, hangal, musk deer, etc. And the diversity, why such a diversity of flora and fauna, is because they lie in the tropical, temperate and tundra climatic region. So that is why. Houses a variety of different plants and animal species. So next is the desert zone. So desert zone, Rajasthan is the major desert zone in our country. So Rajasthan is the desert zone of India, as 60% of the desert lies in Rajasthan, and a portion of it extends towards Gujarat, Punjab and Haryana. But Rajasthan is major because 60% of desert is there in Rajasthan itself. And it is an arid means completely dry region. It is a completely dry region which receives very low rainfall in a year, or low annual rainfall, and it has vegetation that is a scrub vegetation. Scrub vegetation means it will have vegetation with less leaves and all that, not like the trees that you find around you. So the vegetation is a scrub vegetation, and it has lots of grasslands. Therefore, the animals that are there are black bugs. Black bug, you don't find them in large numbers in other areas. Rajasthan is the home for black buck, and also there is a community in Rajasthan which is called as Bishnoi, wherein they worship black buck as a god. So here black bugs, then gazelles, then partridges, quail. Quail is a bird. Then great Indian bustard, it is a bird. And some of the migratory birds such as the sandgrouse, ducks and geese. So all these are found in Rajasthan. Even though you find them, they are very, very minimal in population. Next, talking about the semi-arid zone. So semi-arid means it is not completely dry like the desert. Somewhat dry like the desert, and will receive rainfall, less rainfall only, but more than that of the rainfall that is received by the desert. So these regions are not completely dry like the desert zone, as they receive a little more rainfall when compared to that of the deserts, as the northeast or the southwest monsoon rains do not reach them regularly in required quantity. Again, why they do not reach them in required quantity? Because of airflow and air mass or air circulation that you have studied in the previous sessions. So these regions, they share a common border with the Thar desert in Rajasthan, that is extending into Rajasthan, the Punjab and North Gujarat in the north, and the other parts in the rain shadow of the Western Ghats covering states of Maharashtra, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So, semi-arid zones are present starting from Rajasthan, from the border of Rajasthan, extending to some of the regions of Maharashtra, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu as well. So this is about semi-arid zone, and talking about the vegetation, they have the tropical thorn and dry deciduous forest. Why they have thorny plants is because first of all the rainfall is less. So therefore, in order to prevent excess of evaporation or loss of water from the plants, the leaves will get converted into thorns. So therefore, they have lot of thorny plants with dry deciduous forest, and they also have moisture forest, and they also have mangroves. So mangroves are nothing but they are those plants which grow in the backwaters of the seas and all that. So mangroves. So the flora, that is the plants include, they have acacia, prosopis, calotropis, then gymnosporia, euphorbia, etc. Because all these are plants which have adapted to survive in the semi-arid regions. And Gir forest, that is there in Gujarat, it is a home for lions. So lion population is more and found only in the Gir forest, and it is endemic. Endemic means lion is found only in the Gir forest, that is in the semi-arid zones, but nowhere else in the country. That means it is endemic only to Gir forest, which is having a semi-arid climatic condition. Next, talking about the Western Ghats zone. Western Ghats zone is always luscious green. So we all come under the Western Ghats zone. So the Nilgiris belt that runs through Tamil Nadu, the Kerala and Karnataka. So those hills, they are the Western Ghats zone. So only 5% of India's land is covered by Western Ghats when compared to all the other zones. But in spite of only 5% of the land of a country covered by Western Ghats is very, very special, because though the land area is very, very small, it has a wide variety of flora and fauna, that is plants and animals, when compared to any other zones in this particular country. When compared to all the other 9 zones, Western Ghats is rich in flora and fauna. So therefore, it is a global biodiversity hotspot, and it is very rich in flora and fauna because they have a humid tropical monsoon climate which supports a variety of living organisms. And Western Ghats is also called as Sahyadri. So Sahyadri means mountain range in Sanskrit, and this word is actually got its name Sahyadri from Sanskrit, because in Sanskrit Sahyadri means it is chain of forest mountains that runs parallel to India's western coast from Gujarat to southern Kerala. So Western Ghats starts from western coast of Gujarat and it continues to the southern Kerala. So all these regions have parts of the Western Ghats, and it is a chains of mountains. So it continues. There is no break in the Western Ghat region. It is a chain of mountain that actually continues, and therefore hence it is called as Sahyadri. Next, talking about the Deccan Plateau. Here in Western Ghats, I have not written about the flora and fauna because a lot of lax together of species of plants and animals are present there. So, talking about Deccan Plateau zone. So, Deccan Plateau zone, it is actually the largest plateau in southern India, and it is located between the western and eastern Ghats, and it covers about 43% of India's total land surface. So, Western Ghats covers only 5%, but in spite of that, it is rich in flora and fauna. Whereas the Deccan Plateau covers 43%. Majority of the land is covered by, or majority of the land in India is covered by that is the Deccan Plateau itself, wherein 43% of total India's land surface is of Deccan Plateau. Majority of the southern parts, that is Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, they all come under this particular Deccan Plateau zone. So, in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra and all that, the Western Ghats zone is also there, as well as the Deccan Plateau zone is also there. So, the word Deccan, it is actually derived from the Prakrit word, which means Dakin. So, Dakin means south, and hence it is called as the plateau of the south. Why? Because the southern parts of India is where the Deccan Plateau zone is present, and it looks like an inverted triangle rising to an elevation of over 1000 meter in the south to about 500 meter in the north. So, talking about the climate. So, the climate is semi-arid climate here in the northern parts to a tropical climate in other areas. So, northern parts of the Deccan Plateau has semi-arid kind of climate, whereas the other areas of Deccan Plateau usually has a tropical climate. Therefore, tropical climate means it harbors a variety of flora and fauna. And there are other areas with very dry and hot summers, and they receive a fair amount of rainfall in the monsoon. So, the forest here is said to be older than the Himalayas. So, Deccan Plateau forests are said to be older than that of the Himalayas, and they are home for a variety of flora and fauna, that is plants and animals. Next, talking about the Gangetic Plain Zone. So, Gangetic Plain Zone is also called as the North Indian Plain, which extends from eastern Rajasthan through Uttar Pradesh into Bihar and West Bengal, and these areas are mostly under agriculture. Why? Because they have a very fertile land when compared to any of the other zones. So, they have rich alluvial soil which is deposited by the Ganges river and the tributaries of the Ganges river that are flowing in these particular areas. So, those rivers bring down the soil, good alluvial soil, and deposits in its bank. So, therefore, it is a very good land for agriculture. Therefore, agriculture is more in this Gangetic Plain zone. And they have tropical dry deciduous forest, they have littoral forest, and they also have mangrove regions, that is the Sundarbans. Sundarban is very famous for mangroves and also for tigers, right? So, Sundarbans comes under the Gangetic Plain zone, and they are rich in flora and fauna. Next, talking about the northeast zone. So, about 8% of the country's geographical area is constituted by this particular zone, that is the northeast zone. So, it overlaps between the Indian, Indo-Malayan and Indo-Chinese biogeographical region, and it is a meeting point wherein the Himalayan mountains and the peninsular India tends to meet. So, northern east zone is completely different. The vegetation, lots of orchids and all that are found in the northeastern regions, and more than 60% of their area is under forest cover, and hence they are a treasure for different flora and fauna. Why? Because they have a very good climate, that is they have a humid subtropical climate with hot, humid summers and severe monsoons. We have heard of Cherrapunji, Meghalaya and all that, right? They receive lots of rainfall. So, that is why they have a variety of flora and fauna there. And it is a home for orchids and also various epiphytes. So epiphytes are the plants which grow on other plants, on the trees and all that. You find some plants growing, right? So they are nothing but the epiphytes. So they are a home for orchids and various epiphytes. So orchids and various epiphytes, naturally you don't find them anywhere else in the world in highest population. In India, in a highest population, it is mainly found in the northeastern zone itself. So that is why biogeographical zones are divided based on the type of species or organisms present in that particular area. Next, talking about the coastal zone. So coastal zone you find only in southern parts of India. Northern parts, there is no coastal region. So India has 9 coastal zones, that is in Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu. Then we have Andhra Pradesh, Odisha and West Bengal. And it is divided as West Coast, Malabar Coast, Konkan Coast, East Coast, Coromandel Coast and Northern Sarkars with a total length of 7,516.6 kilometer. So coastal zone in India is 7,516.6 kilometer and it is rich in mangrove vegetation, because in the backwaters of the oceans and seas, these mangrove vegetation is very high, and mangrove vegetation is a home for aquatic and avifauna, that is for the fishes, fish species, and also for the bird species. So the highest tiger population is found in the Sundarbans along the east coast adjoining the Bay of Bengal and is a home for different species of turtles as well. So therefore, Sundarban, a part of Sundarban also comes in the coastal zone itself, and it has the highest population of tigers when compared to any other regions in India. So next, talking about the last zone, biogeographical zone in India, that is islands. So the major island groups of India are Andaman to the north and Nicobar to the south in the Bay of Bengal, then Lakshadweep in the Arabian Sea. So these are the islands that are located in the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. So in Bay of Bengal, we have the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and in the Arabian Sea, we have the Lakshadweep Island. And they have some of the fresh forests or the best preserved evergreen forest of India, as they receive heavy rainfall with both northeast and the southwest monsoons. And they have, because they are in between, that is, they are amidst the ocean, they have a lot of coral reefs. These coral reefs, they are home for millions together of different species which we still do not know. And it is the only region that is inhabited by the large forest bird with a big beak, that is the narcondam. So narcondam is a forest bird that is found only in the island zone of India, and nowhere else in India you can find them. And also it is a home for different varieties of birds and also for reptiles. And Andaman water snake is found only in these islands. So Andaman is home for the water snake that is found only in the Andaman Islands, but you don't find them anywhere in other zones of India. So this is about the island zone of India. So this was about this particular session wherein we learnt about the levels of biodiversity, that is the genetic level, species level and ecosystem level, and also we learnt about the biogeographical zones of India, wherein 10 biogeographical zones were there. And in the next session, let us study about the biodiversity pattern. So biodiversity varies depending on the latitude, altitude and all that. So that we will study, and also we shall study about some of the major global biodiversity hotspots in India. Global biodiversity hotspots usually in the Western Ghats of India. So all that we shall study in the coming session. So we shall meet again in the coming session. Thank you.